My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class where we're going through the book of Exodus. We started in Genesis, we're going to go Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So if you stay alive for the next 20 years, we'll have gone through the whole Bible. On Wednesday nights, I'm in the New Testament, so maybe it'll only be 15 years. We're in Exodus chapter 22. Moses, through God's direction, has brought the children of Israel to Mount Sinai. God is laying down his law because they've had 400 years since God appeared to Abraham, and he had Isaac and Jacob and etc. 400 years of witnessing other people's cultures, ungodly cultures. And so God's going through a retraining program. Here are the rules. I know how they do it over there and how they do it over there. And again, they've seen this for years and years and years, and it's hard not to imitate what you've seen. So God is giving them restrictions, but recognizing that they're babies. We think that God is creating the perfect culture. Here are the things you need to do. If you just follow these things, this is the perfect culture. But just like with a baby, the things you're saying, no, don't open that cabinet, that's to keep them alive. No, don't eat that, don't touch that, don't drink that, it's to keep them alive. And there are things you're training them that they can take at their level. But obviously, as a teenager, you can open that cabinet now, but you now have learned not to drink the bleach, hopefully. So God is giving them certain laws that will keep them alive. Certain, do not do this, don't do this, because your culture will cease to exist. Other things, he's giving them rules that will modulate as time goes by, as they grow older in civilization, where they will learn to expand their definition of neighbor. Like for today, I call this dealing with difficult neighbors. This is what he's teaching them. And eventually he's going to expand that definition. Right now, it's literally the person who lives next door to you, or who has the farm or the vineyard or the orchard, the field where he's plowing next to you, or just 100 yards down. If you can learn to get along with that person, then I'll teach you how to get along with people in other cities. I'll teach you how to get along with people in other countries. Eventually, I'll teach you to love your enemies, not just your neighbors. And so but this is what we learn as children. I'm just trying to teach you how to hold the fork in your hand so I can feed you, but eventually you learn how to feed yourself, and then eventually you learn how to cook for yourself, and eventually you learn how to cook for others. And so you don't start off teaching your baby how to handle a hot skillet, even though that's the eventual goal. And so God is not giving them, these are the rules for the perfect society. Otherwise, he would have eliminated slavery, but he knows where they're at. He knows what they've seen for 400 years. And so here are the rules that would keep you alive, and then here are the rules that will cause a tension, so that ultimately you will grow and you will learn, because you'll see me cooking food and you'll eventually want to do those things. And so as you grow, then you'll say, I don't want to sit in this high chair anymore. I want to sit with the adults. And so eventually you'll want to do these things, and you'll see the joy that other people have eating delicious food. And you think, oh, I want to cook for other people. I want to do, right? And so there are laws that were just, I'm giving you these, otherwise you'll die. And these other laws, I'm giving them to you to create a tension so that ultimately you will personally want to do more and to be more like me. So in Exodus chapter 22, we're just starting after Exodus chapter 22, it says, if a man steals an ox or a sheep, and again, this is your neighbor, because they didn't have cars in those days or planes. People weren't flying in from somewhere else and stealing your stuff. It's someone, and there wasn't a way to take your oxen other than so when he says if a man does this or a man does that, he's not. These are people who live near you who are stealing your things, and you're aware of it because the next day you see, wait, that's my ox. So if a man steals an ox or a sheep, verse one, and slaughters it or sells it, so he's stolen yours, he slaughters and sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So you took it not because I need an ox today and I'm just desperate and because I need an ox to plow out the land and I'm just kind of borrowing from you without asking you. But you sold it and you ate it or you sold it to somebody else. In order to stop you from doing that, know that if you get caught, you'll have to restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for sheep. And oxen were just more valuable than sheep. They were bigger, and also they were used for more things because you would tie your plow to the ox, and it was just work more. Okay. In Second Samuel chapter 12, so 'cause I like to find practical places like where did something like this happen, or where can we see how this was carried out? So in Second Samuel chapter 12, Nathan the prophet is talking to David. David has committed adultery and with Bathsheba. And although David had many women available to him, he takes his neighbor's wife. That's his neighbor. That's in the old days. That's about as far as crime was. It was just what you did to your neighbor. That's why I call this dealing with difficult neighbors. How do we deal with them? Do we shoot them, or do we just figure out a way? Because this law is given to keep people from being vigilantes. If you know there's a justice system and you know there's going to be justice, then you can go to the courts. You have remedies for the situations as opposed to everybody in their own mind taking out justice in the way that they see fit. Let's establish some laws so this way we can keep peace. So I've discovered you stolen it. Fine. So David has just stolen his neighbor's wife. Nathan the prophet comes and gives him this parable. In verse 4, it says, Samuel 12, verse 4, and a traveler came to the rich man. So there's a rich man and a poor man. David doesn't get that this is him and his neighbor. And what do you do if you live next door to some rich person who hires a rock band on the weekends or something? So he's living next to a rich person, a rich man and poor man. A traveler comes to the rich man who refused to take from his own flock, from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring man who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. So David's anger was greatly aroused, verse 5, against the man and said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die, and before he dies, he shall restore fourfold for the lamb, because he did this thing and because he had no pity. And the reason David's saying this is because that's the law. If you take a lamb, you have to give him 4 times as many back. So not only his, but 3 more. You can't give him his lamb if you ate it. So again, this is if you've eaten it, if you still have it, there's actually a different law. But if you've eaten it or sold it, and you obviously can't replace it, 4-fold. So that's why David said 4-fold, not because David he was so angry, because he's just quoting the law. Exodus chapter 22, verse 2 says, now if the thief is found breaking in, this is again your neighbor. The implication when this is breaking in is that it happens at night, at midnight. So there's no street lamps in any of these cities. So when it's nighttime, it is dark. No headlights, no lights coming from people's houses. So obviously people did their crime at night, and that's the idea. In the dark of night, you're wearing dark clothing and you're sneaking in. In Job chapter 24, verse 15, they color this picture. It says, the eye of the adulterer waits for the twilight, saying, ooh, no eye will see me. And he disguises his face. So in the dark, they break into houses which they marked for themselves in the daytime. They do not know the light For the morning is the same to them as the shadow of death. Like they hate the morning. It's like the shadow of death. No, because their works can be exposed. If someone recognizes them, they're in terrors of the shadow of death. Like, no, the morning is bad because in the morning you'll see me. But at night, I'm going to do my evil deed. So that's when the thief went. That's why Jesus is parable about the thief in the night. Today, because we have street lights and street lamps and all that, thieves don't have as much. They'll steal from you in the day. They don't. There's not a difference now. Because I can see you at night. So thieves are like, thank you. You just give me more opportunity. Anyway, but then thieving happened at night. So when it says if a thief is found breaking in, and that means you suddenly are woken up and someone's in the dark in your house and you don't know if they've come to kill you. You don't know if they come to steal from you. You don't know. This next part of verse 2, Exodus 22:2 says, and he is struck so that he dies. There shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. So you couldn't see who it was is the understanding. You didn't know if they come to kill you. There's a scuffle in the dark and he died. That's on the thief for breaking into your house at night. However, verse 3, if the sun is risen on him, so he broke in, he made it out, and the sun is risen on him, then there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. You don't get to then go over and kill him for stealing your lamb. That's not equitable. So, yes, it was middle of the night. You couldn't see who it was, and you're struggling in the dark, and you strike him. But if the sun is risen, that's not the. Again, this is God trying to moderate behavior. So that's not the punishment. That's not the way you should revenge yourself. This is God moderating behavior. He should make full restitution. Again, this is Exodus 22, verse 3. So you don't kill him. He just has to make full restitution, which I already said. You know, if he's eaten it or stolen it, then it's fourfold, and then they'll tell you what the penalty is if he hasn't eaten it, if he still has it. But you make restitution. It says if he has nothing, like you're not able to make restitution, then he shall be sold for his theft. Like, okay. And then when they say sold, they mean now he's got to become your servant. He's got to and pay off his debt. Again, the longest you could keep somebody was 6 years. On the seventh year, no matter how much they took or how much they owed, they had to be set free. God's not trying to bankrupt people and leave them permanently unable to pay their bills. Lifelong debt, God recognized that's not good for society. So if he has nothing, then he feels sold for his theft. But you do have to pay off your debt to the best of your ability and work your butt off for those 6 years. Exodus chapter 22, verse 4. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand. So we already know if it's dead, fourfold. If it's a sheep, fivefold if it's an ox. But if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it's an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. So you didn't kill it, just give it back to me. And here's a penalty on top of that. You got to give me another one. So if you've killed it and eaten it, you got to give me 4 or 5 back. If you took it just to use it for whatever reason, you have to give it back and pay double. Different from all the other communities around Israel, theft was punishable by death. Code of Hammurabi, of different places, death. And God saying, no, here are reasonable solutions, restitution, etc. So God is teaching people not to always respond by, I have to kill you. We have to learn that today. Sometimes you're on the freeway, somebody cuts you off and you think, I have to kill you now. But no, you don't do that. So you restore double. Proverbs 6:30-31 has something really interesting. Proverbs 6 chapter verse 31 says, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. So he's saying we have pity on someone who, you don't despise them. You don't despise them if they steal because they're starving. If they're still because they're lazy and just didn't, or like David, the parable was with David, I just want yours because I don't want to use mine. I got some, but I'm just going to take yours. But people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. So we understand, we sympathize. Verse 31 says, yet when he is found, though, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. Sevenfold? I thought you just said that he was poor and he's starving, but earlier it says fourfold or fivefold or double. This doesn't mean sevenfold what he stole. This means 7 times in a row he might steal, and he has to restore each time. So he must restore sevenfold each time. Sevenfold is just an expression that means a whole bunch. That's when the disciples came to Jesus and said, how much do we have to forgive my brothers? Sevenfold? This is kind of what they're talking about. and they're taking it literally. Because we say a lot of people, there was a million people. Well, there may not have been a million. Sometimes we just throw out certain numbers. Sevenfold just means over and over and over again. But they want to take it literally, like, I've counted up to 7 and I don't have to forgive my brother anymore. And Jesus says, no, 70 times 7. Now, that doesn't mean count up to 490 and then I don't have to forgive anymore. He's just saying, don't let your forgiveness stop. He still has to restore it. He says, when he's found, he must restore. Each time, maybe sevenfold, which means over and over each time. But we don't despise the person because they're still in that position of poverty. So we understand what they're going through. So we don't despise, but that person still has to make restitution. Even if he has to, well, okay. So he's just saying there's different situations, and God is teaching them to look at things situationally, look at things, okay, what's going on here? What's going on in the situation? And as opposed to just reacting out of emotion always. Let me lay down these laws for you so you can see the difference. You're not telling your baby, you can't drink anything. You're just teaching them, don't drink lotion. Don't drink, Clorox, right? But you can drink the Kool-Aid. You can drink the milk. So each thing is different. But at first, maybe just no, because don't just grab things. Let me hand them to you because you don't know the difference. But you want them to eventually to learn the difference. That's what God is teaching here. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 5, it says, if a man causes a field, again, I'm calling this dealing with difficult neighbors. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal, and it feeds in another man's field. So your animals are grazing, but then they get loose in your neighbor's field. And this is mostly always about neighbors. Again, people didn't travel for cities. In fact, during the time of Jesus, people didn't travel 30 miles past their own home in their entire lifetime, the majority of people. So this is talking about dealing with the people who live around you. Let me first teach you how to do that. Then you can learn how to deal with people who live in other villages and other cities and then other countries. It's slowly you'll learn to look at people differently. That's maturity. When we're immature, we hate everyone who doesn't look like us or sound like us or live near us, or you don't go to my high school and so I hate you. You get older and you realize that those are artificial barriers, right? And so God is saying, here, let's just start here with your neighbor, and then I'll teach you eventually to get rid of those barriers, and so that you see everybody as your neighbor ultimately. So your neighbor has had his animals have been set loose. Now he's in your field, grazing on your grass and eating up your stuff, right? Not just your grass, but your crops. It feeds in another man's field. He shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. Why the best? Because there's no way to determine the quality of the crops that were eaten. They're gone. So you can't say, well, it wasn't very good. I'll just give you this poultry stuff. Those grapes were sour, so I'll give you my sour grapes. So how do we know? Your animal ate them all. So just know, if you let your animal loose, however much was taken, eaten up, you got to restore that amount from the best of what you have. These are supposed to be deterrents. They're not always deterrents for everybody, but for some people they work. Exodus 22:6. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed. Okay, if fire breaks out and catches in thorns. Um, in the Middle East and in probably some places in America and in certain places, there are times of the year where they have to burn their crops. They have to burn. Oh, we do that to prevent brush fires. Sometimes there's areas where we'll do a controlled fire. So there's just reasons why sometimes they have to burn the crop. But okay, so for whatever reason you're having to burn some brush, if it says if fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so you've got too many thorns and so you're instead of chopping them down, you're unable to chop them down, you're burning them down, and someone's grain, your neighbor's stacked grain, or his standing grain, or his field is consumed because of your negligence, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So, oh, the fire broke out. Yeah, but you let it broke out. You let your animal break out and eat their stuff. So it's still your fault if you were negligent. Exodus chapter 22, verse 7. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep. So you're giving your neighbor, here, will you hold this for me? Will you keep this for me? Why would somebody do that? We don't often go to our neighbor and say, will you keep my television for me? Persons who were needed to travel, especially merchants in those days, would make a kind of arrangement like, I need you to watch my valuables. There'll be no one here at my house, and I don't want thieves to break in. So will you watch these valuable things while I'm gone? So that's why there weren't banks in those days to keep your money. You didn't necessarily want to travel with a bunch of money and get robbed. So your gold, your money, you might say to your neighbor, hold on to all my gold and money. If somebody breaks into my house, I don't want them to find all of this. So whatever your valuables were, you might deposit them with the neighbor because there was not a bank to deposit your money. That's what we do today. Let me, instead of keeping my $49, let me put it in the bank. So if you've done that, if a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. So if you can find the person who did it, and it wasn't that hard in those days, again, because you know it's some neighbor, people did not travel from city to city stealing from people. So you know it was some neighbor. If the thief is found, he has to pay, but he has to restore it and give back just as much. So you pay double. If the thief is not found, so the thief broke into your house, because again, God's not stupid. He knows that somebody could say, oh, remember that $1,000 you left with me? Oh my, somebody broke in and took it and I don't know where it is. So if the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So again, as a deterrent for somebody taking advantage of someone else, I'm trusting you to watch my things, and how come mysteriously people are always breaking into your house, but only to steal. They only stole my stuff. They didn't steal your stuff.
Nope.
They're good.
Yeah.
So you have to go to a judge and explain, how did they know where my stuff was hidden, or did you just leave it out? Or anyway, so he's making provisions for both. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 9, for any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, and that means thievery, whether it concerns an ox or a donkey, a sheep or clothing, or for any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his. So somebody comes up and says, you stole that, that's mine, because now people can now claim, you took my stuff. It's like, well, this is mine, I've had this, you can't, this handkerchief is not, yours is mine, my grandmother gave it to me.
That's right.
So somebody can always claim that's your stuff. So any kind of trespass like that, of any kind or lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges. So you bring him before the teacher. The teacher says, you took his locket, or she says that was yours, but let me call your parents and find out, right? Bring it before the judges. And whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. Now, in Exodus chapter 18, this whole idea of judges began just maybe 3 chapters ago. Um, in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, and in other countries, do you have judges? No. I just go and I just kill you because I don't like what you did. Moreover, I'm saying in other countries at this time period, right? Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men. This is Moses' father-in-law giving him instruction because Moses is trying to judge every single case, and there's hundreds of thousands of people, and he's trying to judge every case. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, rulers of tens, right? Just have, right? People who hate covetousness, like they're not trying to do this for themselves. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter that they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. And if you do this thing and God so commands you, then you'll be able to endure, and all these people will go to their place in peace. You won't fall out, Moses, if you have a bunch of judges set up in different places, all these different cities. And this is for when you go into the promised land and you're spread out all over Israel. There'll have to be judges every place to judge these small matters just between two neighbors, and between these 12 neighbors versus those 12 neighbors, bigger matters, this city versus that city, even bigger matters. And you'll judge the big ones. So God's setting this in place so that people, again, how to deal with difficult neighbors, I'm calling this. Don't go over there with a shotgun. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, this is Exodus chapter 22, verse 9, an ox or a sheep or any animal to keep, and it dies, so it wasn't stolen, or it's hurt or driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both. So you brought over something that was sickly. It died, or it ran away. It got hurt. I can't watch it 24 hours a day. I'm sleeping, and in the middle of the night, it got up and was prancing around and broke its leg in the pit or something. If no one saw it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So I need to know. You have to swear, and the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. I had nothing. It died because it was sickly when you brought it to me. You didn't know it, maybe. In 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 31, they're dealing with this kind of issue. 1 Kings 8:31 says, when anyone sins against his neighbor and is forced to take an oath, and he comes and takes an oath before your altar in this temple. This is a prayer. So he's praying to God because they're having these sort of situations where things have come up, and he's swearing, I didn't do it, and you're saying you did. He's saying, okay, Lord, these people are coming before God. And remember when we were kids, I swear to God, I didn't, may God strike me dead. That's a thing that was been established for 3,000 years, right? About, may God strike me dead if so that's the kind of oath they would take. So he's praying in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 31. He says, so when anyone sins against his neighbor and is forced to take an oath and comes and takes an oath before your altar in this temple, and that's where the oath will be taken, then hear in heaven and act and judge your servants, condemning the wicked, bringing his way on his head, and justifying the righteous by giving him according to his righteousness. So we're going to see the results. Maybe you will be, if you believe that there's a God, and God's saying, I'm writing this, and so I am going to back up my word. So if you're lying, it's going to come up on you. So this wasn't just, sure, you can take an oath and get away with it. It's like, no, you're standing in the temple before God at the altar, so just know there will be consequences. Exodus chapter 22, verse 12 says, but if in fact it is stolen from him, like that's not what happened, it didn't just die, and you're taking an oath, But if in fact it is stolen from him, then he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. So I'm holding your ox for you, I'm holding your sheep for you, and in the middle of the night, a bear came from the woods, or a lion came from the forest and killed it. Then don't just say, "Oh man, animal ate it, killed it, and I'm so sorry." You have to bring in the evidence. Bring in the evidence, and then there's nothing. You're not held responsible for what a wild beast did. This happened in Genesis chapter 31. Jacob had been working for his father-in-law Laban for about 20 years, and he's finally able to go free. Well, actually, he chooses to just leave in the middle of the night. So Laban thinks he's stolen stuff from him and chases him down, and he searches all his things. Right? If your neighbor or your employee and Jacob an example of this kind of indentured servant. He worked for 7 years in order to marry Leah, and then 7 more to marry Rachel, and then he stayed on 7 more years, and so it's been 21 years. Every 7 years you're given your freedom. He chose to work the next 7 years for Rachel, and then he chose to work 7 more years. But at the end, on the 7th year, you're always given your freedom. So it was the 21st year. I'm out of here. Laban's chasing him down. He didn't find anything because Rachel is sitting on it. She's put it in her saddle and she's sitting on her horse and she's saying, I really can't come down off my horse. It's a bad time of year for me, bad time of the month. So I'm going to sit here. Laban wasn't crazy. He had been stolen from, but Jacob didn't know that. So Jacob's mad at him at this point. Why are you searching all my things? And it turns out you were wrong. Because had he been wrong, he would have had to, had Jacob been wrong, he would have had to pay it and pay double, right? So although you have searched all my things, he says in Genesis 31:37, what part of your household things have you found? Nothing. Set it here before my brethren and your brethren that we may judge between us both. So set it out here and then we'll judge and see that this really belonged to you, this belonged to me. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. So the stuff that you gave me to watch, that you put in my care, it didn't just show up missing. That which was torn by beasts, I did not bring to you. And this is what that means. Because if you find a carcass, you have to bring it to him and show him, I didn't do it, a beast did it. I bore the loss of it, as a matter of fact. So it happened, but I just paid and bore the loss. I didn't, I just paid. So it says, because you required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. So you actually weren't following the law. So whether it was stolen in the middle of the day, because if it's stolen in the middle of the night, that's supposed to be different. It's thief broke in the middle of the night, and there's supposed to be different rules for if it's happened at night, because there's a rule you'll see coming up where it says if it happened right in front of your face, then there's one penalty. If it happened in the middle of the night and you weren't there, there's a different penalty. If a wild beast did it, there's all these different penalties. And he's saying, you've really treated me bad. You've been a horrible employer because that which was torn by beasts, you didn't let me bring it to you. So you made me pay. You required it from my hand. You made me pay out of my own pocket, whether it's stolen by day or by night. You weren't following any of these rules. So this is not just Jacob complaining. He's actually quoting the law back to him. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, Saul says to David, a young David, King Saul is talking to David, Goliath's out there, and David saying, let me go against Goliath. And in verse 33, Saul says to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. Like you're just now a youth, and he's been doing this since before you were born. From his youth, he's been doing this. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and I struck it and I delivered the lamb from its mouth. So it happened during the day. I saw what was happening and I protected it. because it's a different thing if it happens at night and you're asleep. And I delivered it from its mouth, and when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, and I struck and killed it. So your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. So I've dealt with bears and lions and all this stuff and protected the sheep. And even I took it out of their mouths before they got a chance to tear it to pieces. So there's a different law for if it happens and you're standing right there and you see it, and then if it happens behind your back at the middle of the night. Verse 14 says, 22:14, Exodus 22:14. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it not being with it. So that's what, like, it happened at night. You weren't there. He shall surely make it good. Why? Because you borrowed it. You borrowed it, and you vowed to protect it, and then you left it alone. You left it vulnerable. So you have an extra burden to pay. So you have to make restitution, just not as much as you were if you, well, let's read the verse 15 says, if its owner was with it, he shall not make it good. Meaning, he says, if it was hired, it came for its hire. So what does that mean, if for its hire? Okay. You don't have to, there's a difference between it happened at night and you just left it up by itself, or you left it alone, but you were there and the animal came and did it. You were renting it. It says, if it was hired, you were renting it and the owner put an extra deposit on it. You know how I'm going to rent this, but there's a $500 deposit. It's only costing $25 to rent it, but there's a $500 deposit so that if you damage it, we're just going to keep your deposit. That's what he's saying. You don't have to make it good because it was hired. The owner included that, like, you're gonna, I'm charging you extra, and then when you return it, I'll return your deposit. But I don't have to return your deposit because if it was hired, you don't have to make it good. You've already paid it. If you just borrowed it, then you promised to take care of it, and now it's destroyed, and that's on you. You got to make it good. But if you're renting it, then they're assuming that the owner included that. If something happens to it, let me charge you this extra money. So just keep it. I'm going to keep your deposit. Basically, God invented that. I will now keep your deposit. But that's fine. That's how it should be. This is how much the thing costs. And if you return it back and it's fine, I'll give you back your deposit. Here's the last verse I'm going to do because it changes after this. God, these are the penalties. The first part of the mishpatim, it's called. These laws are laws with penalty. Starting after verse 16, and I'm on 14, so I'll read 14, 15, and 16. After this, then he simply says, here's how I want you to live. I'm going to give you a set of laws that don't have external penalties anyone else sees, but I want you to know that I see it. And so he begins to give the laws without penalty. But these are the case law that he's giving. Like, here's how you're going to, because it involves other people. These other laws, a lot of just involves you and what's going on inside of you that only you and I know about. So I'm telling you that it's wrong. These other laws, these first laws, involve how you're dealing with your neighbor. And I have to give you ways for doing that because you just want to always take matters into your own hand, and you've got to be governed by a law. And then you can learn, if you can learn how to do that with your neighbor, then you can learn to do that with your neighborhood, and then with your city, and learn how to treat people and learn, etc. So 14 and 15 were how to do it if you've rented something or borrowed something. Verse 16 is the last one with penalty. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed, and he lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. So you got to marry her. Interesting, I don't know when it changed. I have to do some more research. But the dowry, you had to pay to get the bride. At some point in some cultures, it changed where the father of the bride was like paying the groom to take her off their hands. Here, I'm the father of the bride, so I pay for the wedding. I pay for everything. But originally, that's not how it was. Women were considered valuable. And, oh, you want my daughter? Well, you're going to have to pay. And so if a man entices a virgin, because those were very valuable, I guess in that day, men didn't want, like you need to be, you have to be a virgin. You can't have slept with a whole bunch of men. So, but you've enticed my virgin. So now she's lost her value. So you got to marry her now. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. Interesting, it says, if her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he should still have to pay mourning according to the bride price of virgins. Like you still have to pay the price, but I'm not letting you marry her. Forget it. In Genesis chapter 34, verse 11, Shechem has slept with Dinah. She's one of the sisters. There's more sisters, but they didn't mention their names. But of the 12 sons of Jacob, right, Judah and Levi and Reuben and Issachar and Zebulon and right, all of them, they had a sister, Dinah, that they were very protective of. Shechem sleeps with her. Shechem eventually became the name of the city. They just named it after him, but he sleeps with her. So in verse 11 of chapter 34 of Genesis, it says, Then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. You name the price. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me. But give me the young woman as a wife, because that's what you have to do. You're not betrothed to her, and you slept with her, and so you got to pay. But the sons of Jacob answered in verse 13, Shechem and Hamor his father, and Hamor was really one who had to pay the father-in-law, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to him, we cannot do this thing to just give our sister to one who's uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. So here's the condition, but on condition that we will consent to you if you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised. So that's the bride price. That's why Shechem went out and said, okay, guys, everybody's got to be circumcised. I know you're all adults, but we're going to take these stones and circumcise you. Okay, so when you were babies, you got over it, but this is going to lay you out for a while. And of course it did. For 3 days, they couldn't move. And that's when Dinah's brothers came in and killed them all, led by Levi and Simeon. And mostly led by Simeon. Later, the brothers gave up Simeon and take Simeon. When Joseph says, when God had to stay, they all said, take Simeon, he's crazy. So, and Jacob's father yells at Simeon. So we just get the feeling it was led by Simeon. Simeon had a problem. And so, but he's paying the price. What you name the price? Okay, the price is going to be your foreskins. Okay. So, in fact, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, this is the price that Saul gives to David. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 25. It says, Then Saul said, Thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hands of the Philistines. So you go out by yourself, David, and kill 100 Philistines and cut off their foreskins and bring it back to me. And then you can marry my daughter. At least with the brothers of Dinah, they did it to themselves willingly. Well, they did it, I mean, as willingly as you can, but they did it to themselves. But it's like, David, you go out, kill 1,000 Philistines, and prove that they're dead because you have their foreskins in your hand. So, verse 26. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Oh, man, I can do that. I get to be the king's son-in-law. Yay! Now the days had not expired. And therefore David arose and went. So he gave him a time period. That's mean the days had not expired. He said, you got this amount of time to do it. Therefore David arose and went, he and his men, and he killed 200 men of the Philistines. And Saul only asked for 100. Let me just overdo it so you don't send me back for more. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full count to the king. And 1, and 2, right? They just counted right before him, which it must have been just a smelly affair, not cool. Okay. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them full count to the king that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Okay, everybody, because everybody heard him make that vow, and David came back and did it. Okay, you can marry my daughter. So if the father, again, utterly refuses, though, it says in verse 17 of back to Exodus 22, then you still have to pay the money according to the bride price of virgins because you defiled my daughter and and no one may ever marry her, but I don't want to marry you because you're crazy. But you still have to pay what she would have been worth in value to one as a wife and as a mother, etc. So I'm stopping there because the next set of laws, again, there is no penalty. There are different type of laws that are about our own conscience, where God's saying this is wrong and this is wrong, this is wrong, but He doesn't. There's not case studies where He says, and here's how you handle it, and go to the judge, etc. And so we'll discuss why God sees these laws differently. Um, and then on Wednesdays, so again, thank you very much for listening today. On Wednesdays, we are in, hey, Clemmy, we are in, oh, okay, Clemmy's in Mexico. We are in the book of John. It's kind of the last maybe 12 hours of the life of Jesus. And he's giving these very important words to his disciples because, and John remembers them. Matthew was there. Mark and Luke, who got their stories from Peter's and others, they weren't paying that much attention because they just thought, well, Passover's tomorrow. That's the important day. We'll really be listening tomorrow. However, John was listening that night because he realized there is no tomorrow as far as Jesus is concerned. He's going to be on the cross. So John got it, even if nobody else did. So I'm inviting you to our Wednesday night Bible study at 7 o'clock. And again, thank you for listening in today, and I'll see you next week. All right, bye-bye.